We're so sorry to bother you, but the rain is just too heavy. My children are freezing. Please, can we come inside?
The bell above the door was the only thing that still worked right in that whole building. It rang twice that afternoon. The first time, nobody came in, just wind shoving rain through the gap under the frame. The second time, I looked up from the register and saw a woman standing in the doorway with 3 kids soaked to the bone, water dripping off 4 of them onto the floor mat I'd bought, used from the laundromat down the street. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know she'd just driven 100 miles from Hartford, with everything she owned packed into a car that needed new brake pads. I just saw a woman trying to keep 3 kids calm while she shook the rain off her coat, and I did the only things that made sense. I put the kettle on. By the time the smallest one, a boy who couldn't have been more than 4, had both hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa. The woman was sitting on the stool by the paint counter, staring at her own hands like she was trying to figure out how she'd ended up there. "No one's going to marry a widow with 3 kids, she said. Not to me, really. More like she was saying it out loud just to see if it still hurt, the same way it had the last 100 times she'd thought it. I'd heard a lot of things said in that store over the years. Complaints about screw sizes. Arguments about paint colors. One guy who cried over a broken birdhouse he'd built for his late father. But nothing had ever made me put down what I was holding the way that sentence did. "That's because they haven't met you yet," I said. She looked up at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. "My name's Nathan Webb. I'm 36. I've run this hardware store on Main Street in Ashford, Vermont, for going on 11 years now. First with my wife Laura, and for the last 2 years, alone. She died of cancer 18 months after the diagnosis. And since then I've kept this place open 6 days a week, 7 in the morning until 6 at night. Mostly because the alternative is going home to a house where her coat is still on the hook by the door, and I haven't found the nerve to move it. I wake up before the sun most days now. Not because there's that much to do before opening. Just because lying in bed in an empty house, listening to the quiet settle into every corner of it, is worse than getting up and doing inventory I already know by heart. I didn't plan on telling a stranger any of that. I didn't plan on much that day, honestly. But that's usually how it goes. The days you don't plan for are the ones that end up mattering most. The woman's name was Claire Madsen, 30 years old. 2 jobs already lined up before she'd even found a place to live, because that's what you do when you've got 3 kids and no one behind you to catch the fall. She didn't tell me any of that yet, not that first afternoon. All I knew was the sound of rain hitting the windows, 3 kids drying off by the space heater, and a woman who looked like she'd been apologizing for her own existence for a long time. She had no idea, sitting on that stool with cocoa going cold in her kids' hands, that walking into my store to get out of the rain was about to change both our lives. She came back 2 days later, not for cocoa this time. She stood just inside the door with her hands shoved in her coat pockets, like she was bracing herself to ask for something, and already expecting to be told no. "I saw the sign in your window," she said. "Help wanted." I'd had that sign up so long the tape had gone yellow at the corners. I'd stopped expecting anyone to actually ask about it. "I can run a register," she said. "I can stock shelves. I'm good with people, even when I don't feel like it." She said that last part fast, like she wanted to get it out before she lost her nerve. "I just need something part-time. I've got a server job at the diner on Elm in the evenings, but the hours during the day are open." I looked past her at the truck idling at the curb. An old Corolla really, not a truck, with a crack running across half the windshield and a car seat visible in the back. I thought about Laura's ledger still sitting untouched in the back office, because I hadn't been able to make myself add anything to it in 2 years. I thought about how the shelves had looked the same way for so long I didn't see them anymore. 16 an hour, I said. 20 hours a week. I can't promise more than that right now. She blinked like she hadn't expected an actual number that fast. 16's $2 over minimum here. I know what minimum is, I said. I also know what 20 hours doesn't cover, so I'm not going to pretend 16 is doing you a favor. Something moved behind her eyes, somewhere between surprise and the kind of caution that comes from being disappointed by people before. When do I start? Tomorrow if you want it. She wanted it. I figured I was hiring someone to ring up paint cans and sweep the back room. I didn't figure on her sitting down with the ledger on her third day, glasses pushed up on her head, frowning at a column of numbers like they'd personally offended her. "Who's been doing your books?" she asked. "I have." "Right," she said, in a tone that told me exactly what she thought of that. Turned out Claire had 2 years of community college behind her, accounting, before she'd left school to marry a man who decided pretty quickly that a wife with a degree and her own opinions was more trouble than he wanted. She never said it that bluntly, not that first week. It came out in pieces, the way most true things did with her. But she knew her way around a spreadsheet better than I knew my way around my own register. She moved the checkout counter 11 feet, closer to the door, and put the impulse items, the batteries, the work gloves, the little flashlights, right where people's hands landed while they waited. She reorganized the seasonal aisle so it actually matched the season. She started tracking what sold and what just sat there collecting dust and taking up shelf space I was paying rent on. 3 weeks in, I ran the numbers she'd set up and stared at them for a long time. Revenue was up almost 15%. 15%. From moving a counter and putting WD-40 next to the register instead of in aisle 4 where nobody ever looked. "You went to school for this," I said. It wasn't a question. "I went to school for a lot of things I didn't get to finish," she said, and didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. I was starting to learn that with Claire, you let the door open as wide as she opened it. Not wider. The kids took longer to warm up, and then all at once they didn't. Sam, who was 4, and had the kind of seriousness most 4-year-olds don't bother with, started calling me Mr. Owen even though that wasn't my name. And after the 3rd time, I just let it stand because correcting him felt like it would matter less than him having someone steady to call anything at all. Mia was 7 and drew constantly, and one Tuesday she came in after school and handed me a picture of the store, crooked roofline, a yellow sun the size of the building itself, 3 stick figures, and a 4th one behind the counter that I understood, with a tightness in my chest I wasn't ready for. Was supposed to be me. I put it up by the register with a piece of tape, and it's still there. Noah was 10, old enough to notice things the younger 2 missed, quiet in the way kids get when they've had to grow up faster than they should have. He started coming in after school to help me break down delivery boxes, and he was good at it, methodical, careful with the box cutter in a way that told me somebody, probably Claire, had already taught him to take things seriously. We didn't talk much while we worked. We didn't need to. One evening in late November, Claire stayed after closing instead of rushing off to the diner. "I'm off tonight," she said. "I made too much chili. You eat dinner standing up at that counter most nights, don't you?" It wasn't really a question, and I didn't bother lying. We ate at the little table in the back room, the one I usually used for paperwork, surrounded by paint cans, and a space heater that rattled when it kicked on. The kids argued over who got the last of the cornbread. Sam fell asleep sitting up before we'd even finished, his head dropping onto Noah's shoulder like it belonged there. "This is the first meal I've had in this building that didn't come out of a can," I said. Claire looked at me for a second too long. "That's not a high bar." "No," I said, "it's not." She almost smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her get all the way there. I didn't say much else that night, but something in the back room felt different walking out of it than walking in. Like the place had remembered, just for an hour, what it used to sound like when it wasn't just me and the hum of the cooler. It was around that same time David Shaw started coming around more, mostly under the excuse of needing weather stripping, or a new latch for his porch door. Though I think half the time he just wanted an excuse to stand at my counter and talk. David and I had played football together at the regional high school outside Ashford, 20 years back now, and he'd gone on to study law and come back to Windham County, instead of staying in Burlington where the money was better. He ran a small family law practice out of an office above the pharmacy, 2 doors down, and he had a way of reading a room before he ever opened his mouth in it. He noticed Claire behind the counter the same week she started. Noticed the kids' artwork going up on the wall. Noticed the way I'd started leaving early some afternoons, instead of closing up alone at 6, like always. "She's good for this place," he said one day, leaning on the counter while I rang up his order. "She's good at her job," I said, careful. David just looked at me the way he used to look at the other team's quarterback right before a blitz. Sure, he said. That's what I said. He didn't push it further that day. But I noticed, not long after, the way his questions about Claire started getting a little more specific. Where she'd come from, whether she had family nearby, whether anyone ever came around asking about her. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just David being David, a lawyer's habit of noticing things other people didn't bother to. I had no idea yet how much that habit of his was about to matter, or how soon. It started with a truck I didn't recognize, parked across the street from the store for 3 days. Straight before I understood what I was looking at, Claire saw it before I did. I was restocking the nail bins when she came up beside me, close enough that I felt her go still rather than heard it. "That's his truck," she said. "Quiet, flat, the kind of flat that takes years of practice to get right." "Whose?" "Travis's." I'd heard the name maybe twice before that, always in passing, always followed by Claire changing the subject in a way that told me more than the words themselves ever could. I set down the box of 16-penny nails I was holding. "He followed you here. He found out somehow. I don't know how." Her hands had gone to the hem of her sleeve, working a loose thread the way she did when she was trying not to look as scared as she felt. "He always finds out." I didn't ask what that meant. Not then. I just told her to take the rest of the afternoon, and I watched the door for the next 2 hours like it owed me something. He came in on a Thursday, 3 days later, wearing a jacket that cost more than my truck's last oil change, and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Travis Doyle. 34. Built like a man who'd spent money on a gym membership instead of on anything that mattered, and carrying himself like the whole store, the whole town, owed him an explanation for existing without his permission. "I'm looking for Claire Madsen," he said. "I understand she works here." "She's not in today." "Funny, her car's out back." I didn't blink. I said, "She's not in today." He looked at me a long moment, recalibrating, the way men like him do when the first approach doesn't land. "I'm her husband. Was her husband. I'm just trying to see my kids. That's all this is. A father wanting to see his children." He said it smooth, rehearsed, like he'd practiced the sentence enough times that the shape of it no longer required any actual feeling behind it. "Then I'd talk to her lawyer," I said, "not her boss." That got a flicker of something real behind the smile. Just for a second. Then it was gone, and he turned and walked out, and I stood there with my pulse going harder than it should have for a conversation that lasted under a minute. 2 weeks later, the papers came. David Shaw walked into the store holding a manila envelope like it was something that might go off if he jostled it wrong. "Travis filed in Hartford," he said, no preamble, because that was David's way when the thing mattered enough. "Motion to modify parental rights and responsibilities." He's saying Claire relocated the kids without proper notice. He's saying she's unstable. He hired someone good. He hired someone expensive. Family attorney out of Hartford, the kind that runs $3.50 an hour, and doesn't take a case, unless the client can afford to be wrong for a while. David set the envelope down on the counter between us like it was evidence at a crime scene. But here's the thing working in our favor. The kids have been in Vermont over 6 months now. Under the UCCJEA, once that residency threshold is met, Connecticut isn't the right court anymore. Vermont becomes the home state for custody purposes. I'm filing to transfer jurisdiction to Windham Unit. Right here, Vermont Superior Court, Family Division. If the judge agrees, Travis has to come to us. Not the other way around. And if he doesn't agree, he doesn't get a vote, David said. The law does. I should have felt some relief hearing that. I didn't, not really, because 2 days after the papers came, the rumors did too. I heard the first version of it from a customer buying weather stripping, a woman named Carol, who ran the flower shop 2 doors down and meant well most of the time, which somehow made it worse. I heard that gal working your register. She took those kids and ran, just up and disappeared with them. Her husband's been looking for months. That's not what happened, I said. Well, that's what I heard. I heard it again at the gas station. Again at the post office. By the end of that week, it had a shape of its own, independent of anything true. The way rumors do in towns small enough that everyone's business becomes everyone's business, whether they asked for it or not. Then came the grocery store. I wasn't there for it. Claire told me after, standing in the back room with her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her ribs in place. She'd been in the checkout line with Sam on her hip and a basket of groceries she'd budgeted down to the dollar. And Travis had been standing 2 registers over, and he hadn't lowered his voice at all when he said it. Everyone here should know what kind of woman they're dealing with. She took my kids across state lines without telling me. That's kidnapping. That's a crime, whatever she's telling people. The whole line had heard it. The cashier had heard it. Claire said she just stood there, Sam's small hand fisted in her collar, and didn't say a single word back, because anything she said would have just given him more to work with. I should have said something, she told me, and her voice cracked right down the middle of that sentence. I should have defended myself. You don't owe him a defense, I said. You never did. The parent-teacher night at Noah's school was the following Tuesday. I hadn't planned on going. I went because Claire was working a double at the diner that night and asked, almost too casual to be casual at all, if I'd mind sitting in for her, since Noah's teacher had specifically asked for a parent or guardian to attend. I was standing by the gymnasium wall with a paper cup of bad coffee when I heard Travis's name again, this time from a man I didn't recognize, talking to 2 other parents just a few feet away, not bothering to keep his voice down. You know the mother kidnapped those kids from their own father. Whole town's talking about it. Makes you wonder what kind of woman does something like that. And then Claire walked in. She must have left the diner early, still in her work apron, hair coming loose from its tie, and she froze 2 steps inside the door when she caught the tail end of what the man had said, and every part of her seemed to fold inward at once, like she was trying to make herself small enough to disappear before anyone noticed she'd heard it. I didn't think about it. I just crossed the gym floor, took her hand in front of the whole room, and felt her fingers go rigid with shock before they finally slowly closed around mine. She's the most decent person I know in this town, I said, loud enough that nobody in that gymnasium had to strain to hear it. If you've got something to say about her, say it to me. The man's mouth opened and then closed again. Nobody said anything else. I felt Claire's hand shaking in mine, but she didn't pull it away. And I didn't let go, and standing there under those fluorescent lights, with a room full of people who'd already made up their minds about her, I understood something I hadn't let myself admit until that exact moment. This wasn't about helping a woman who needed a job anymore. It hadn't been for a while. What I didn't know yet, walking out of that gym with her hand still in mine, was that Travis wasn't done. Men like him never just walk away when the first humiliation doesn't land the way they wanted. And somewhere in a courthouse 2 counties over, a date was already being set that was going to decide a lot more than just whose name went on a custody order. The night before the hearing, I sat on the front step of the store with the clothes turned around behind me, and the street light on Main Street buzzing the way it always did right before it gave out for the night. Claire came and sat down beside me without asking, close enough that her shoulder almost touched mine, not quite. David thinks we have a good shot, she said. David's usually right about these things. She wrapped her arms around her knees, the same way Sam did when he was trying to hold himself together. And if he's not? If some judge looks at me and just sees a woman who ran, then he hasn't looked at you very long. The wind had picked up, carrying that first cold edge of a Vermont December, and somewhere down the block a dog was barking at nothing. I thought about the 2 years I'd spent, keeping this place open at the same hours, eating the same dinners, standing at the same counter, telling myself that was a life. Then I thought about a kitchen full of chili and cornbread, a drawing taped up by my register, a boy who took the box cutter seriously, because someone had taught him that things done carelessly tend to break. "I need to say something," I said. "And I need you to let me say all of it before you decide what to do with it." She went still. "This stopped being a part-time job for me a while ago. I'm not talking about the store. I'm talking about you. About Noah and Mia and Sam. I don't want to go back to how things were before you walked in here soaked to the bone. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want this to be the family I come home to. Not an arrangement. Not me being kind to my employee. A family." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Long enough that I started to wonder if I'd said too much, too soon, with everything else she was carrying. Then she reached over and took my hand, the same way I'd taken hers in that gymnasium, except this time there was no room full of strangers to be brave in front of. Just the two of us and a streetlight about to die. "I love you," she said, like it cost her something to say it and was worth the cost anyway. "I haven't let myself say that to anyone in a long time." "I love you too," I said. "I've known it longer than I've been willing to admit." We sat there a while longer, not talking, just letting that sit between us the way the cold air sat over the whole town. And for the first time since Laura, the quiet didn't feel like something I had to survive. The Vermont Superior Court, Family Division, Windham Unit, sat in a brick building in Brattleboro that looked like it hadn't changed its furniture since the Carter administration. I sat in the gallery behind the rail because David said it would help, having Claire look back and see a face that wasn't afraid. Travis sat across the aisle in a suit that fit too well for a man who hadn't filed a single school form for his kids in 3 years, his Hartford attorney beside him with a leather folio that probably cost more than my truck. The attorney opened strong. Mrs. Madsen removed 3 minor children from the state of Connecticut without notifying their father, without court authorization, and established residency in Vermont unilaterally. "This is the conduct of a parent acting outside the bounds of the law, Your Honor." Regardless of her reasons, David didn't raise his voice. He never did. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the children's enrollment and attendance records from Ashford Elementary, dated within 30 days of arrival. Fully transparent, fully on the public record. There was no concealment here. There was a mother finding the nearest safe place to put her children in school." He called the neighbor next. A woman from the old apartment complex outside Hartford, who testified by video that she'd called the police twice on domestic disturbance complaints at Claire and Travis's address, and that she'd watched Claire leave with bruises on her arm more than once that she'd been too afraid to report further than a phone call. Then he called Noah's teacher. She was a soft-spoken woman who taught 4th grade and clearly hated every second of being in that courtroom. And she said it anyway. She said that 2 weeks earlier, Travis had shown up unannounced outside the school gate, and that Noah, mid-sentence in the middle of a math lesson, had gone white, slid out of his chair, and crawled under his desk, and would not come out until the principal confirmed the man was gone from the property. I watched the back of Claire's neck while that testimony was read into the record. I watched her go rigid, the way a person goes when they're holding very still, so they don't fall apart in public. Travis's attorney tried to recover. "Your Honor, a single incident involving a child's reaction doesn't establish a pattern of." "It's not a single incident," David said. "It's consistent with 3 separate police reports from Connecticut, a discharge summary from Hartford Hospital, documenting an injury Ms. Madsen sustained 18 months ago, and a temporary housing intake form from a domestic violence shelter in Hartford County, dated the week before she relocated to Vermont. I have copies of all 3 for the court." The room went quiet in that particular way. Courtrooms go quiet when the story everyone walked in with stops matching the one on the table. The judge, a woman with reading glasses pushed low on her nose, and the patience of someone who had clearly run out of patience for performances a long time ago, took her time before she spoke. The court finds that the relocation was neither concealed nor unlawful, and that the evidence presented raises serious and credible concerns regarding the children's safety and emotional well-being in the respondent's care. She looked at Travis directly when she said the next part, and her voice didn't rise, it just settled flat and final. Sole legal and physical parental rights and responsibilities are awarded to the mother, Claire Madsen. Mr. Doyle's contact with the children will proceed under supervised visitation only, through an approved third party, until such time as he completes a certified anger management program and a full parenting evaluation. Any future modification of these terms will require this court's review of that documentation. Travis's jaw worked once, hard, like he was chewing on something he couldn't spit out in front of the judge. His attorney put a hand briefly on his arm. Claire didn't cry until we were outside on the courthouse steps. And even then, it wasn't the kind of crying that needed comforting. It was just 2 years of holding her spine straight, finally letting go all at once, in broad daylight, in a town that had spent weeks deciding who she was before they'd bothered to ask her. I didn't say anything clever. I just put my arms around her and let her shake against my chest until she was done. And somewhere behind us, David was already gathering his files into that worn leather bag he'd carried since law school, not looking at us, giving us exactly as much privacy as a courthouse steps could offer. Show 2:41 p.m. A year passed the way years do when you stop counting the hard days and start counting the good ones instead. The store doesn't look the same anymore. Word travels in a town this size, and somewhere along the way it's stopped being the place with the yellowed help wanted sign and started being the place where that woman straightened everything out, where the register actually balances at the end of the night, where you can find what you came for instead of hunting 3 aisles for it. Revenue's up enough that I finally stopped doing the books myself for good. Claire runs that side of things now, full ledger, full inventory. Her name on the order forms right next to mine. I gave up trying to keep up with her numbers a long time ago. I just trust them. I asked her to marry me on a Tuesday afternoon in February in the store because I'd tried to think of somewhere more romantic and kept coming back to the fact that nothing in our story had ever happened anywhere fancy, and I didn't see why that should change now. Noah was breaking down delivery boxes by the back wall. Mia was drawing at the paint counter. Same stool Claire sat on the first day I ever saw her. Sam was stacking paint cans into a tower he had no business building. I got down on one knee right there on the worn floor mat, and Claire's hand went to her mouth, and I heard Mia gasp before I'd even gotten the ring out of my pocket. I've been keeping score on this place for 2 years, I said. Best decision I ever made was hiring the woman who walked in here soaked to the bone. Second best is asking her to stay for good. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence, and Sam knocked over his entire paint can tower cheering, and none of us cared. We got married that spring on the green behind the church on Main Street. Nothing big. Folding chairs borrowed from the fire department, half the town there, because half the town had, by then, become something like family to us too. Noah stood up as my best man, 11 years old and serious about it in a way that made my throat tight. Old Mr. Russell, who'd been buying nails and lottery tickets from me for 15 years, walked Claire down the aisle because she said she wanted someone steady beside her for that walk. And there wasn't anybody steadier in Ashford than him. Some ordinary Saturday that fall, I was out back helping Noah finish a birdhouse he'd been building for a school project. Both of us hunched over the workbench with sawdust on our sleeves, and he handed me a nail and said, without even looking up, "Dad, hold this steady." I held it steady. I didn't say anything. I don't think he noticed what he'd called me. I noticed enough for both of us. Tonight I'm standing at the window with the closed sign turned around, watching the rain come down soft over Main Street the way it did. The first afternoon, Claire walked through that door with 3 soaked kids and nothing left to lose. I think about all of it, the cocoa, The ledger, the courtroom, the gymnasium, the ring on the floor mat. And I think the only thing I know for certain anymore is this. Kindness doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere. It changes something. And one day it finds its way back to you in a shape you never saw coming. Thank you for watching this Amora Stories.